Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to our furniture program lecture series this fall. We've got another 3 lectures beyond this in the next month, so keep your eyes peeled on your email and for those announcements coming up. If you're not signed on to kind of our email list, there's a clipboard back on the railing over here, so be sure to put your information on there so we can contact you and give you all our announcements. So we had a little bit of a break-in tonight. The last 3 rows are kind of corded off, so if I could just ask people to not go back there at all. We've got Michael Hosaluk here with us this evening and this weekend to do a workshop and a lecture with us, and we're really happy to have him. He comes to us from Saskatchewan, Canada, and is recognized internationally as one of the world's most creative wood turners. Michael's work covers a wide range of objects and materials, including functional vessels, furniture, sculptural pieces. His work is humorous and elegant, possesses character and gesture, and is full of reference to architecture, nature, and culture. Michael's work has been exhibited internationally, and his pieces can be found in the permanent collections of Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, in the Buckingham Palace. Zhao, I may be pronouncing that incorrect, the governor of Jilin province, China. Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Detroit Institute of Arts, Yale University Art Gallery, and Minneapolis Institute of Art, and the Royal Ontario Museum. So he's quite well known. Michael is a member of the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts, and earlier this year became an honorary lifetime member of the Saskatchewan Crafts Council. He's an active and on the steering committee of the Furniture Society of North America and on its advisory board. He is recipient of the Sadie Bronfman Award, the highest award for craft in Canada, and the Lieutenant Governor's Award for Lifetime Achievement in Saskatchewan. Michael's work has been profiled in numerous publications, including Fine Woodworking, American Craft, and Woodwork magazines. And he is also the subject of a book published in 2002 titled Scratching the Surface, which I think he has here with him, if anybody's interested in looking at that. He's lectured and demonstrated extensively throughout Canada and the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, France, Norway, and Israel. In the fall of 2006, he was with us here at CCA as our Warnick Distinguished Professor in Wood Arts, and taught our atelier class that semester. And we are so happy that he's agreed to come back and run a workshop with us this weekend. And I'll turn the time over to Mike.
Thank you, Barbara. You hear all that, and all that matters in the end is like, what are you making next, and how's it going to come out? And that's the way I always feel about all this. But thank you all for showing up. I always say without no audience, there ain't no show, so I appreciate it very much. I grew up on a farm with no modern convenience of any kind. Handwork was a way of life always. I remember my father showing me how to make a crossbow out of found objects on the farm. And we could shoot the top, I was like 4 years old, we could shoot the top window out of a grain elevator. Well, we did it once, and that was the measure, but I've always loved making things ever since I was a little kid. So I'm just going to tell you some stories about my life, about my work, and some of that journey that, as a person who makes things and has that passion for it, what happens in their life. And focus in a lot on different collaborative things that I've been a part of throughout the world. Got married, had 4 kids, and went right to work. I had a cabinet making business, and it got to the point where I wasn't satisfied with what I was doing. You know, I was making money, upper middle class, you know, bought a house, bought a new truck. But I quit cold turkey, and I thought I just want to really make furniture and start just making the things that I've always wanted to read about. So I brought in, didn't go to any college. It was beyond that, just wasn't able to. So I brought in everyone from around the world that I wanted to learn from. So I crafted my own education, and it was funny because I could phone anyone and they would say yes. And then they'd say yes, and they'd be like, where am I going? And realize that it was a long ways away. But those were, you know, all the different people. That's how I learned at the beginning. And I had this reverence for wood. I would make things out of wood, and that's what drove me. It was material, technique, finding ways of doing things that were unique in wood, and different textures. And I still go back to wood. It's sort of the material that grounds me. If I'm lost for any ideas, I can pick up a piece of wood and be comfortable with it and make something. But usually it won't last long. And then just playing around with different surface design. I love doing that. And I have a background of, Ukrainian background. So grew up in a culture that was very colorful and vibrant. And this set of salad bowls that I made here, I liked it so much as a stack of bowls that I sold them all just as one sculpture. And it was a good way to get rid of all those bowls all in one shot rather than trying to sell them individually. But I shifted over to color a lot, and it really changed everything in what my direction in my work. And adding content, this was a series called Ceremony. I remember I was on the way to the lake with my new in-laws, and there was a dead porcupine on the road, some roadkill, and I stopped and threw it in my father-in-law's trunk, and, you know, he shook his head and looked at his wife, and they wondered about me all their life. But so that was using techniques from wood turning, natural edges, but incorporating different concepts about not only the material and technique, but about your social, ideological life. Did a lot of traveling and teaching, and this was a series I called Traveling Bowl. And I was in Australia, how long? 60 days, and of those 60, I was teaching 45 of them, and covered about 2/3 of the country. And it's sort of how I felt. It was like, you look at this bowl, it looks like it's going to fall over, and you look at it another way, it looks like it's running. But it chronicled all the stories as I went along throughout that country. A self-portrait, another series that I would do, just introvert, extrovert, because we all are that once in a while. And birds. Nature is a big part of what I do in my work. And I do a lot of furniture making, so I would cross over, taking designs from turning, incorporated into furniture. And I still make this series. It's called, there's Canadian, this is my Ukrainiana. And it's all just a little off, and different ideas of different furniture from that culture. And it was interesting. I remember doing a bowl, and they weren't selling it all. They were all burnt black, and because everyone was used to really nice, beautiful, colorful wood. I was carving on it, and this lady came up to me and said, "Are you Ukrainian?" And I thought, "Yeah, why do you ask?" And she said, "Because all the patterns you're carving into that bowl are all from old Ukrainian pottery." She'd worked in a museum. So it just made me realize that if you really let go and just do things as you feel them, that they have that truth and honesty to them. Another series, Future Species. And And the ideas from a lot of, like I was saying, the vessel, the furniture. I remember my wife asking me, can you just like make me a normal table or for the house? And so this is what I came up with. But it incorporates ideas from that go back and forth within vessel and furniture. And I'd enter a lot of design competitions for the contract furniture market and do really well, but it just wasn't a friendly bunch of people, and it wasn't somewhere that I really wanted to spend my life. And it seemed like the woodworking, the wood turning field was just such a great bunch of people that's where I decided to devote a lot of what I did in my life to that. This was a series I called Structures, and I had a good friend in Chicago, and I remember arguing with him about form and function in architecture, and I went home, and that's the series I did. So a lot of it comes from experience, and I think a lot of us with whatever we do, and when you have that passion and you really get into your work, your life influences what you do and places you go. The field of wood turning, I always feel it's important to stretch the limits of interpretation, so I would do pieces totally not of wood and put them in wood turning shows just because they had been on that lathe. And just so that it was more to change that direction of how people thought about wood turning, that it could be anything and everything. So those that are going to attend tomorrow, we'll have a little fun, and we'll see what different directions I can make you think about wood turning. Through this time, I'd met and traveled many places, met some amazing artists, and I thought, boy, wouldn't it be fun? There was Dawn, Jamie, and I, two good friends, sat down and said, wouldn't it be fun if we could get all our peer group together and just get a whole bunch of beer and materials and just sit around and just make stuff. And so we did. We came up with the Emma International Collaboration, and we invited people from all over the world, from all media, in a remote place in northern Saskatchewan where cell phones didn't work, and I think there was one payphone there. And we just shared knowledge with each other. There was no hierarchy. There was no schedule. You know, all you had to do is get up, make stuff, eat, make more stuff, sleep. And it's really been a life changer for a lot of people on how to exchange knowledge with each other. So you could go any station of blacksmithing, glassworking, and learn from that person openly and make stuff. And it was important for us to give back to the community. So every time we made money from the event, we built that gazebo so that the place would grow. We added electricity. At first there was no electricity there. So it's just really started to be a part of all that provincial community. And so that would show you how unique, I gave a panel to everyone. It's a 2-inch panel, and I said, draw a person with a hat. And so when you look through there, you can see some parallels, but everyone is very unique in who they are. And that's what I always found fascinating, how individual and everyone had something to give, and it was all good. And I would bring a lot of different materials, rawhide, found objects, everything, and just so people could just openly experiment. And what was great about it is you were away from your studio, and then you'd make the stuff, and you had no ownership too, so there was no preciousness at all to it. You know how we make, and it's like, oh, I'm making this for this person or for that purpose, and you're always careful about it. Here, you didn't have to be careful. You could just do whatever, and so different creations would come out of it. Good friend Mark Orr, and from this all is the networking and the friendships that have developed worldwide. This was a piece he was working on. He called it Kenia Harding's Poodle, And so you never, and that's collaborating with probably 10 people. And so you never know. Someone could come up and change something very quickly. There I made the top, and I asked 3 different people to make a leg for it, and then that's what comes out of it. You could be immortalized in something. That's Gord Peterin. And there he is. I remember he saw the Northern Lights one night, and they put him in a whirly jig, and every time that went around, the bottle of scotch hit his head and it bobbled. And stories about Emma would be put into books, very unique books. Shenanigans at Emma. And, on that legend, you would read acts of nakedness, and the list gets worse as you read down it. So, and then you would put, wherever those acts would happen, you would, put a pin right there, and that was our cabin right there, pinned a lot. And interpretations of the different buildings, the architecture of the site. That was Kenderdine number 9. Paul Sasso made that little cabin. And that's actually there, that little cabin. That's one of the original ones. And the site was started by a whole bunch of artists back in the 50s, and where they would go and do painting. And Bennett Newman, a lot of the New York critics all were there and wrote about it. Another interpretation of the arts, of the architecture there. When we started this event, there was probably, the first Emma had 10 women and 90 men, which was really hard on the showers for the men. The women loved it, but as this event changed, and that was back in '86, that from those 10 that came, they said, well, there's this person and this person. So the networking, where it ends up that one year there's more women than men. So it was a really nice change to see that happen. And that the showers were a lot easier to use too. The blacksmithing, that was a throne that was made from Emma. Metal spinning, Lynn Hall. So you could go and learn all these different things. Metal tube making, a pillow with a slipper out of steel wool. And a lot of this, there was Christine Shiga and I would always make a belt buckle. And the belt buckle, when you wear it down here, these were from old tin, so they all had certain connotations to them. So when I went home, I had all these old tins, so I just kept making all kinds of belt buckles. And when you walked around the site, that was really a common look, was that just that contentment and just happy. Everyone had this big smile on. And again, interpreted into different objects that would get made. And a really good friend of mine, Bobby, he made all the instruments for a band. And so we had our own Emma band, very strange sounding, but I remember the first song they did was Anchors Away, because they built a whole bunch of different boats that really didn't work. Most of them sunk. But the band was good, and the ideas were great. And that was the greatest thing about this, is that not everything was successful, but the openness to try in new directions and work was what came out of that. I don't think anywhere in the world in history that things were made like this. And to sustain the event, which is ongoing, and we would sell everything off. So it's kind of a strange thing, because you would pay to get there, work your tail off for a week, and then if you wanted anything back, you had to buy it. And we always make enough at the end to do it again and contribute to helping the community. And there you have someone from Wales, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, and it really was an international event that connected people all over the world. And you always had, if you were in any of those countries, you were just welcome there. And the leaving, that's, the hardest part, saying goodbye to everyone. But beautiful, that's northern Saskatchewan. Kind of looks like the bay I saw yesterday with the light, the sunset and everything. Except it gets cold and freezes. And pieces that were made, this is a bowl of strange and unusual fruit, and it kind of depicts who we are. We're all in this same boat together, but we're all so very different from each other. And there's so many influences for me every time I go to one of these events that I come home and make different things. So this would be a series of mine that I still do. Still, it changes every time, but it's these boats full of different objects that depict, and they're like little experiments for me of things that can become more bigger in scale, different surfaces that I can play with, and different things that come out of it, a chair, teapots, personifying things. I've brought one teapot if anyone wants to. It's like the one on the poster. And this was a piece I made to commemorate a friend's death, Frank Poodle, who was a biologist. And so I invented all these kind of species not of this world, and put them on this vase. And from that came just a design that I transformed them all into bronze. And somebody wanted a piece where they had all these growths coming through the wall and into their house. So that's what that piece is. And they come out at different places around the house. But it was fun taking it from the 2D to 3D. And then I made a screen, an outdoor screen. It's all bronze, copper, steel, where you can have plants grow through it during the summer, and then come fall and winter, that's left outside like that to have its own growth there. So I do a lot of not only wood turning, furniture making. I love doing metalworking, casting. I make jewelry. So I think anything that you have an idea for, I like the challenge to learn that. Patinas were a real challenge. And the networking that we do, Russ, who's a very good friend, invited me to come and do the L'Atelier program. And I remember driving into San Francisco late at night. I took this picture, and then that drive through the tunnel, and how many times I would cross that Bay Bridge in that 2-3 months that I was here, and the learning of patience in a vehicle. But I got invited, and I had no idea what I was going to do, so I used the chair as an experiment, and so tried, made up these framework of chairs, which was really nothing to do with the chair so much as the metaphorically looking at what the chair is, And so these chairs started showing up everywhere. In Oakland, different students would put them up to myself. They couldn't get rid of these chairs anywhere, so they tried, but they kept showing up, gluing them to trees. And so that was like the first act of terrorism right there. So, and the one guy there, the guard, he'd make sure that no one took that chair off. And some of them you had to cut off to get the gates open. And some stayed for a while, but they weren't too permanent. The permanence was more about the photography. But they interacted well with different parts of the architecture. And then I enlisted a chairist, Russ. And one night, we went and glued up one chair to Gary's tree. It was about like 2 in the morning, and it's raining out, and I thought Russ would go up, but no, he said, no, I'm not going up there. And so it was up two stories, and so anywhere where Gary looked out of the kitchen or out of his living room, that chair was right in front of him. And I remember him phoning me in the morning. It was about like 10 o'clock before he realized it was out there. And you can just imagine what Gary would say. It always has a little bit of profanity in it. But that chair is still there, and he's rebuilt it and restructured it, but he said it'll be there right to the end. And so this was the group that I worked with, and it was a great bunch of young minds that I got to spend time with and learn with. And it's always that way with teaching, that I think you're as much the student and you learn more probably than the students themselves, because you have all of them to learn from. And that's, for me, is teaching. Teaching is learning. So when I went back, I had all this stuff. It was like the Beverly Hillbillies going through customs. This is like chairs piled up, and the guy at customs, he had one look, and it's like, go. He just didn't even want to untangle that mess. But I did the show, and the start of it was in CCA, and it was called Containment. And the way I just won the Bronfman Award, it's this prestigious thing, and I had 2 retrospective shows, different places, and they asked me again for the local art gallery to have another one. I said, no, I just can't do a 3rd retrospective show. And I said, I'll just do something new for you. And they said, what? And I said, I'm not sure yet. And it's like 6 months, and art galleries, they don't like to just, but the curator trusted me. And so I called it Containment, mainly because when we go through our careers, so often we get pigeonholed with, like, people know me and all they call me is a wood turner, but I do so much more. And that can really hold you back to your exploration as a person. So for me, this was probably the most liberating thing I had done, is to break away and just try something that is like you're on a grant, but you're paying for it yourself, and it's and just what happens to you, the transformations of your thinking. And I remember one person, one of my students, sent me this note, and I'll read it. In order to accomplish something, one must dedicate oneself to it totally. So much so that our fellows can't even imagine such exclusivity. And that does not mean at all the amount of time consumed. There are also innumerable emotional subterfuges practiced toward oneself, slow transformations of personality, as if one's supreme goal, beyond one's will, and knowledge pulled in a single direction, an organized destiny. And I think that's such a good feeling when you get into a new series of work, or you just open that door to new exploration, and it takes hold of you, and you really lose control, and you just wake up in the morning and you make what comes to you first, and then you question it and you think, what the hell was that? And then you do it again, and you just don't have control, and you just have to let it out of you, and it's not always all so successful. So this show, I wanted to break the first thing I did was create some publicity. So acts of terrorism hit Saskatoon. It took about 11 days before they could figure out which department removed chairs from trees. This was probably the most expensive chair rescue in the history of chairs. And the one, every week there was like some article about chairs or terrorist or some kind of terrorism. And the whole idea of the acts of terrorism was to counteract all the propaganda on terrorism that was at that time in our lives. It was just getting so tired of it. But it was, playing along that, and it drew people out. There was probably the second most attended show that was at that place. And the whole premise of it is that the chairs were always in flux. Any artist could walk in and change the show. There was no given to it. So I started with this, and then it just kept changing. You could, this was a tower of chairs, and every place I never intended it ever to travel. I just thought I'm going to do this one show and then that'll be it, and I had no idea, but it ended up traveling, and each place that it traveled to had its own kind of installation that complemented each gallery. So that was a tower of chairs, and so that was one of the installations. I walked in one day and that's what was there. And then this one was just different changes that somebody did and gave me the photos of what. And then I would do a lot of school groups, kids who would come in. They had probably I did about 10 of them. So every time that I would have one, they'd go in through the doors and they would funnel in. There was only one way they could go, and they'd get greeted by these little chairs. And I remember all the kids who were just like so well behaved, and their chaperones were there. And then I would just turn them loose. And it was like they were in their element, and all their chaperones were like all like, what do I do with myself? They wouldn't join in. But the imagination of kids, I love it. And then big kids. This was another show at another place. A person, Henry Wolfe, liked the show so much, he wrote the chair monologues. And I had no idea that this would happen. And they performed them before the show was over. The show was on for 2 months. And they had all kinds of stories. But I'll read you one poem he wrote, which I like. It's called An Affectionate Chair. When a chair's right there, it's not just anywhere. It's in your space, in your face. It lets you know what's what kind of plans it's got. Sure, you can sit, but you better fit, or you'll be out of there. You can't fool a chair. If your heart's not in it, best not begin it. Make for the door, run for a mile, never turn around and see that chair smile. But if it's love at first sight and your feelings are right, it'll put its arms around you, and your thoughts will flow happily day after day, once you've learned how to love and to honor and how to obey. So be careful, tread softly, even beware if you once catch the eye of an affectionate chair. So Paul, the one in the middle next to Henry, and Dwayne, he was the percussionist. He played the chairs. There was a whole soundtrack to this that an amazing percussionist sounds he could get out of a chair. And me, I just watched. But we had good audiences. And another thing that How to Be a Chair was a series of animations done by Paul Crapo, who a really good friend. It was how a chair growing up, how to become a good chair. And it was all these animations and films that he would do about love, suicide, bullying. He just died this year. A good friend, gone. And he had plans. He always had plans for me. It was like, Mike, we're going to do this, even though I wasn't into it, but I would always do it with him. The last day of the installation in Saskatoon, I went there and I thought, I'm going to do one last thing. I want to try and make an arch or something, use them as a building block. And I went there, and that's what was there. And I figured out, I thought, well, who did that? It's kind of what I wanted to do, and it was my son. And his friend who worked at the Mendel. They thought, well, we're going to do one last one. And they're the ones who helped me set up the show and everything. So it was an arch. And then when it traveled, there was a troupe. They did dances with chairs where they used all the chairs and to do this whole choreographed dance, made costumes for it. So when I started this whole project, I had no idea, but it was fun to see that interaction with public. This was when it went to Prince George, the curator, and the one person, they did this piece called Ascension, and where these chairs kind of go up to heaven, but it's not all that it's meant out to be, all those black chairs up there. So it was interesting to see that each curator and the gallery would do different things with it. And instead of a Christmas tree, they did a chair tree. My father was really an important person in my life. So when he died, I went through all his stuff, and he had this big bin just full of chair parts, spindles. So I made this one shrine for the show, just to commemorate his death. Took all the spindles and just stapled the heck out of them. And Birds of a Feather, it's about how all my friends, have that connection to each other. And I like making some furniture pieces now. Well, they're broadly interpreted as furniture, but display pieces where light plays an important part, where it's skeletal, where you create pieces within it and the shadows become as important part as anything. And this piece started with that bird cage I found at the dump. It's like the Tweety bird cage, and I thought, I can make something out of that. And that's all it takes sometimes to start an idea. And then different people that I call on, and they always help me out, send me a bird, and then you incorporate it into a piece. And commissions from different shows, people see it. I don't do a lot of commissions, but there was all these chairs that you couldn't sit on, but it held up a bench that you could sit on. And I put these cocoons with chairs up around the city during the show, and they just went unnoticed. They stayed there forever. It was sort of like if you disguise a chair, it'll stay there. Another element of it, the little chair show, where I sent 35 little chairs around the world, and it was for a fundraiser so that we could build a cultural building, and now it's coming into fruition. It's the foundation's in, the structure's going up, and we'll have this place where creative learning can happen in northern Saskatchewan. So, and just different people who, again, these experiments with an idea and how different we think. And all of this got sold online. It raised a fair bit of money. It was enough money to keep sustaining the idea, because it takes a long time before you can get a big amount of money to start building. But it was enough to just keep the idea going until we finally secured enough to start the project. But you can see how different we all think and people's interpretations. That was an easy one, just cut it up. And I'm so lucky that I have this pool of people that I send ideas out to, and they respond to them, like for different exhibitions, like Decoy. Every time we do Emma, we always have an exhibition, and because it's a really good way to get to know a person if you can see how they think through their work. And so we have this opening of an exhibition before we go up there. And it's just a really good start to the whole event. And really good friend of mine, Mark Spheri, we've been doing the Mark and Mikey show for, well, it's probably, we've been friends for almost 30 years. And so every 10 years we have the Mark and Mikey show somewhere, and it changes every time. This was from the first one. And we just don't make stuff like that anymore. And Mitch Ryerson, we did Cabinets of Curiosity, and this was a collaboration by faxing each other. Now people hardly use fax machines anymore, but so we'd fax our ideas until this is what we came up with. So it was Round Guy Meets Square Guy, it was called. And I went to Penland, and it was called Fire and Wood, and I remember they were making a bench, and they had all these wedges, and they were splitting it apart to get the piece, because it's the only way that they could separate the wood. And the next morning, someone asked me how to steam bend things, so I showed them steam bending, and I put two together, and I did this wedge banding, because I wanted to see that you could cut slits into things and start bending different materials, and this was an idea for a bench. And I bent and moved different pieces of wood of my own through different techniques, and I thought, well, I wonder if I could move other materials different ways and try to start to get those shapes out of steel. So that was one of the first experiments where I could start bending steel into a nice flow and configuration. And at that time there was this proposal in Calgary for a pipeline, and so we proposed that you could have all these different kind of worm-like shapes coming in and out of the earth and through the banks. Didn't get it though. It would have been a hell of a lot of work, but we would have done it. And so start to do a few more public sculptures. This one's on the riverbank in Saskatoon. It's these boat-like shapes that at the top it looks kind of like a shrine, and then as it comes cascades down, and depends where you are, at the end of it, it looks like a boat that's ready to launch into the into the water. And as you look from a distance, it looks kind of prehistoric. So it's given me ideas like where I did this whole show called Put a Wedge in It. And so I explored the whole idea of how you could use a wedge. And I've got a lot. I should have photographed some of the drawings where these wedges come out of the landscape. And it was in Washington, and I thought that monument looked a little too straight, so I altered it. And we were in the Old Man River in southern Alberta, and woke up one morning and we built a giant wedge in the water. Why? Just because, But it was, there was about 9 of us, I think. Took about just the morning and a few really good smashed up fingers. And And it stayed there till the thaw and the ice took it out, but it was fun building. And just did wedges. That was a grass wedge. I did this show called Put a Wedge In, and it was really, again, just experiment totally with an idea. And that was called White Man's Totem Pole. And it's, I found all these chunks of wood at the dump, all chainsawed, and it really makes a statement about how our culture really hasn't got a lot of history, and we always take from other cultures and interpret it and try to use it as our iconology, and it's sort of like we still have a blank canvas of what we can do, and when I look back at the chair structure I did before, it kind of plays with that whole concept of totem. And so it's opened up a whole series that I'm going to do. It's just these white man totem poles, and they'll all be about what is important in our culture. And I'll play with that. Bench with a wedge. It's called Stonehouse Bench, so you can pick it up, wheel it around. It's in the police station in Saskatoon. It's a good place for it, kind of, where a wedge always gets between different people. And different wedges used for benches. Wedge hunting in the prairies. So these are cast bronze. In a way, it's when you grew up on the prairies, like there's a pig. When you slaughtered a pig or a cow, it's like this celebration where all your families got to get, excuse me, together, and it was like the sustenance for a while, because you had no refrigeration when I grew up on the farms, and you shared all that and took a piece of it, and then next time you got together you did it again. So it was kind of about that. And there's also a good friend of mine who's let me use some of his heads from his castings. Wedge birds. And the winter went on, so there was these big snowbanks out front of my shop, so I just put a wedge in all of them. Oh. And just had that's going to happen there. It's not advancing. Let's see, maybe I can click on here. Try that again. There, got it. For one who doesn't know technology, I figured it out. I do a lot of carving with Dempsey Bob, and I carved a head, and you know the old saying, put a sock in it. Well, this is put a wedge in it. Wedge Awards. These are two politicians that are well deserving. Expedition of the wedge heads. Broken Hearts. Bowl full of wedge fruits. And then splitting steel with glass. It was a nice contrast. And just taking these big chunks of steel and splitting them open, it just had a lot of fun. You had to heat the whole darn thing up, but it was, and just playing around chairs and wedges. Anything that you could put a wedge into, I did. And after this was like all done, the morning before the show, I just did this piece called All Wedged Out. And it was just like, because it was enough of the wedges, and I just had to draw this. And I, probably finished it at 3 in the morning. And I think that's the hardest part in art, is to expose yourself to the public, to let anything and everything out of you and show it. It's so much easier just to be comfortable with different things. And that's one thing I've always done. I've never been kind of afraid to just show anything that I try. Lionel Grant, one of the best Maori carvers, if not carvers in the world. We spend a lot of time together and exchange knowledge. And this was a piece I instigated for him and Dempsey to make. And once I started working on it, they kicked me off the project and said, no, you can't do this with us. But at least I got them to do it. And it told about how their cultures interacted with each other's culture, and one going into the other and the parallels. And it was interesting seeing all the patterning that Lionel used. And these were charcoal drawings I did called Collaboration, which had a parallel to his designs done years before I even knew him. And that connection, and that, we're so connected, him and I, somehow, that in the work that we do with each other. And so that was some of the ideas that came from that drawing, different masks that I was making, vessels, panels that could be for furniture. And then this was the SS Grant that we did together. I did the turning in his Maori designs and copper clad, and it was mechanical. It would open up. Grew up in a place, it was Rama, and they had this amazing area that was shrines. It was called this grotto, and this was like my playground. So I was always fascinated, never ever thought that I'd make a shrine, but at AMA one year I did a shrine to commemorate the event. And so I thought, well, I got invited to Penland to go teach, and they said, well, what do you want to teach? I said, well, how to make shrines. And I'd never made one except for this one together, and so we called it Shrine-a-Rama. And it really changed how the whole collaboration changes how I teach now. That I try to discard with the hierarchy. Everyone's a student, everyone's a teacher. Those that know the most about anything should be the one who teaches. And just sharing openly with knowledge rather than you being the one who tells what to do. So one of the first shrines we built was alms for beer, so we could always have a beer fund. We never raised much money, though. And Bobby Hansen, he'd always show up. Always, wherever I go, he'd be either assistant to me. And different shrines that people would make. And we had so much fun. And that was one we did for Penland, and everyone, all the instructors, all the students, everyone kind of contributed to it. There was like confessions in there about stories you would never hear. They're censored too. They were in these panels, and it's an amazing piece, really, that told the story about that place. And the whole concept of collaboration has really gone worldwide now. I remember last year I got invited to France, Ireland, Scotland, New Zealand, Australia. So there was 8 different events, Hawaii. And it's just become a really good format for open learning from each other and sharing of knowledge and camaraderie. So this is Whangarei in New Zealand. Amazing site. And similar format. Everyone brings a whole bunch of their junk from home, and we make valuable art out of it. This chicken got immortalized. It was running around. We thought we'd be eating it, but it survived. And just different things that depict the event, different words from their, cheers, bugger, different things from that culture. Ireland, it's spread. They did a wall, all out of carved wood to look like. And if you've been to Ireland or Scotland, that's rock walls everywhere. And the site that Emma's at now is Ness Creek, and it's an interesting site in that the tributary here starts, it's kind of like it starts there and it goes to Hudson Bay, and then which in turn goes all over the world. So it's like it all starts here and goes out to the world. And metaphorically, it's like that too. All those people that go to this event, they go out to the world and do different things that are really quite unique in art. One year we had no power, so we went Emma Unplugged, which was, for me, it changed how I thought about making. That you take away power and you have to be inventive of what you do. And Bobby's always there to have fun. He's gone now, good friend of mine, but I remember when he came off the bus and he just looked out to everyone. He said, "Oh, my people." And it is like this worldwide clan of people that get together and share and have fun together. And he was always so inventive to keep the wheels going and objects that he made. And that's my daughter on the far, and Maggie Sasso closer to me. And it was interesting when we started this event, Paul, her father, and I were the ones instigating, and now it's gone to another whole generation of young instigators and taking that idea further. And which in turn will create all kinds of new ideas and new birth to everything. Welcome. Hi. And that's the end. That's why I said hi.